John is a 15-year-old boy who lived with his parents in the city of Lagos. John's father was a very hot-tempered man. He would always find fault in everything his mother did. Even when she did something good, he would criticize her. "Stupid woman," he would shout. "Can't you do anything right?" John's mother would try to explain herself, but John's father wouldn't listen. He would just keep shouting and criticizing her. Sometimes, John's father would even slap his mother. John would hear the sound of his father's hand hitting his mother's face, and it would make him feel bad. John didn't know what to do. He was just a little boy, and he couldn't stop his father from abusing his mother. He would hide somewhere and watch as his father shouted and slapped his mother. "Why are you doing this, Daddy?" John would ask himself, tears streaming down his face. "Why are you hurting Mommy?" John felt so helpless. He didn't know how to stop his father from abusing his mother. He just wished that his father would stop shouting and hitting his mother, and just be nice to her, but John's father never stopped. He just kept on shouting and abusing John's mother, and John felt like he was all alone in the world. "What am I going to do?" John would ask himself, tears streaming down his face. "I'm just a little boy. I don't know how to stop Daddy from hurting Mommy." One day, John's father beat his mother mercilessly. He beat her to the extent that John had to call his auntie, who came and took his mother to the hospital. After some treatment, they returned home. John was still shaken by what he had seen. He asked his mother, "Why does Daddy always beat you like that? My friends in school tell me that their fathers pamper their mothers. Why can't Daddy pamper you? Did you do something bad to him?" John's mother broke down in tears. "Son, your father is just a hot-tempered man. That's why he always beats me like that. I don't do anything bad to him, but he just can't control his temper." John felt a surge of anger towards his father. He told his mother, "Mummy, I don't want Daddy to beat you again. I don't want him to hurt you. Can we please leave Daddy and move to Auntie's house? I don't want Daddy to kill you one day." John's mother hugged him tightly. "There's no problem, son. Things will be fine. I'll talk to your father about this, and soon he'll stop beating me." But John was not convinced. He knew that his father's behavior was not going to change anytime soon. He just hoped that his mother would be safe, and that his father would not hurt her again. As they hugged each other, John's mother was still shedding tears. John felt a deep sadness in his heart, knowing that his parents' relationship was not a happy one. One fateful night, John was sleeping in his room when he heard his parents' voices arguing in their room. They were arguing about sex. His father was asking his mother to give him sex, but his mother told him that she was very tired. She had just come back from the hospital after treatment for the beating his father had given her, and she didn't have the strength for sex, but his father wouldn't listen. He started beating his mother mercilessly, shouting at her and calling her names. John could hear the sound of his father's fists hitting his mother's body, and it made him feel bad. As he listened to the argument, John realized that his father had raped his mother. He felt a surge of anger and hatred towards his father. And he didn't know what to do. John was in his room, shedding tears and crying. He was asking God why he had such parents. Why couldn't they understand each other? Why were they living in this type of life? John felt ashamed of his parents. He couldn't even boast about them outside, even when his mates were talking about their parents. He knew that his parents were living a bad life, and he didn't want anyone to know about it. As he lay in bed, listening to his parents' argument, John felt helpless. He didn't know what to do to stop his father from beating his mother. He didn't know how to make his parents love each other again. All he could do was cry and pray to God to help his parents. He prayed that his father would stop beating his mother, and that his parents would learn to love each other again. The next morning, John came out of his room and saw his mother. She had bruises on her face, and John's heart sank. He asked his mother, "Mom, what happened to your face?" His mother pretended that nothing was wrong. "Oh, I just hit my face on the wall while coming out to use the restroom last night," but John wasn't fooled. He knew that his father had beaten his mother last night. He told his mother, "Mom, you're lying. I know what happened last night. I heard everything." His mother looked at him, tears in her eyes. John asked her, "Why are you always covering for Dad? Why can't you just leave him? You deserve better than this." His mother broke down in tears. "Son, marriage is for better or for worse. I married your father, and I'm not going to leave him." "I don't want to leave him and make you fatherless." John was frustrated. "But Mom, you're not happy. You're always getting beaten and hurt. Why can't you just leave?" His mother shook her head. "I'm not going to leave, son. I'm going to stay in this marriage and make it work. Your father will change, I'm sure of it. Just give him time." John wasn't convinced, but he didn't push the issue further. He just hoped that his mother would be safe and that his father would change his ways. In the afternoon, John's Auntie Sophia, visited her sister to check on her after the treatment she received from the hospital. But to her greatest surprise, she saw bruises on her face. Auntie Sophia was angry. "What happened?" she asked, her voice raised. John's mother tried to cover up for her husband. "It's nothing, Sophia. I just fell and hit my face," but Auntie Sophia was not convinced. "How long will you continue to remain in this type of marriage?" she shouted. "Do you want to die before your time? Do you want to die before your time? Yes, answer me." John's mother tried to calm her down. "Everything will be fine, Sophia. I have faith that things will be fine very soon." But Auntie Sophia was not convinced. "You need to leave this marriage," she said. "You and John can come and live with me. We can take care of each other and leave this monster alone." But John's mother refused. "I don't want to leave my home," she said. "I don't want to leave my husband." Auntie Sophia tried to convince her, but she refused. Finally, Auntie Sophia gave up. "Just take care of yourself and John," she said. "Be strong for John. And whenever you notice that John is angry, just leave the house for a while. Don't stay back and allow him to beat you to that extent." John's mother nodded, tears in her eyes. Auntie Sophia hugged her tightly. "I'm here for you, sister," she said. "I'll always be here for you." One day, John sat alone in his bedroom, crying and shedding tears. "Why couldn't they just be happy and give me a brother or sister to play with? Why, God?" John cried out. "Why is my father like this? Why does he always have to beat my mummy? I don't understand." John thought about his situation and realized that his father was the one providing for the family. His mother didn't work, and his father always used that as an excuse to belittle her. "If I get money," John said to himself, "I will look for something for my mom to do. Something that will make my father respect her." John cried some more, asking God to please bring a change in his father. He wanted his father to stop beating his mother and to start loving her instead. After a while, John decided that he wanted to talk to his father. He wanted to ask him why he was beating his mother in that way. At least, he wanted to hear his father's side of the story. John wiped away his tears and went to look for his father. He found him sitting in the living room, watching TV. John sat down next to him and looked up at him with tears in his eyes. "Daddy," John said, his voice shaking. "Why do you always beat Mummy? Why can't you just love her and be happy with us?" His father looked at him with a mixture of surprise and anger. "Son, you shouldn't bother yourself about this," he said. "Your mother is very stupid. She's stubborn and doesn't listen to me." John looked at his father, his eyes filled with tears. "If my mother is stupid, you wouldn't have married her," he said. "And if my mother is stupid, she wouldn't have stayed in this marriage, tolerating all the abuse you give her." John's father's face turned red with anger. "How dare you speak to me like that?" he shouted. "I'm your father, and you should respect me." John stood his ground. "I respect you, father," he said. "But I don't respect the way you treat my mother. You should stop beating her. One day, you might beat her to death, and I don't want to lose my mother." John's father was furious. "How dare you threaten me?" he shouted. "You're just a child. You don't know anything." John looked at his father, his eyes filled with determination. "I may be just a child," he said. "But I know that what you're doing to my mother is wrong. And I'm telling you, father, if you beat my mother again, I swear to God, I will beat you back." John's father was taken aback by John's words. He had never seen his son stand up to him like that before. He was angry, but he was also impressed. "Get out of my sight," John's father shouted. "I don't want to see your face again today." John turned and walked away, leaving his father alone in the living room. He felt proud of himself for standing up to his father, but he also felt scared. He knew that his father was capable of doing terrible things, and he worried about what might happen next. One faithful afternoon, John's father came home from work, and he was furious. He had been looking forward to eating lunch all day, and now he was being told that it wasn't ready yet. "Where is my food?" he shouted at his wife. "I told you I would be home for lunch, and now you're telling me it's not ready." John's mother tried to explain. "I'm sorry, dear," she said. "I went to the market to get the ingredients, and there was a lot of traffic. It took me longer than I expected to get back." But John's father wasn't having it. He was too hungry, and he was too angry. He started shouting at his wife, calling her names and accusing her of being lazy. John's mother tried to defend herself, but John's father wouldn't listen. He just kept shouting and yelling, his face red with rage. Finally, he lost control and started hitting his wife. John's mother tried to protect herself, but John's father was too strong. He kept hitting her, again and again, until she fell to the ground, crying and bleeding. John's father stood over her, his chest heaving with exertion. He was still angry, but he was also exhausted. He turned and walked away, leaving John's mother lying on the ground. John's mother slowly got to her feet, her body aching and bruised. She looked around the room, trying to process what had just happened. She knew that she had to get out of there, but she didn't know where to go. She thought about John, her son, and how he would react when he found out what had happened. She knew that he would be angry, and she didn't blame him. She was angry too. As she stood there, trying to decide what to do, John's mother heard a noise behind her. She turned to see John standing in the doorway, a look of horror on his face. "Mom, what happened?" he asked, his voice shaking with fear. John's mother tried to explain, but she couldn't. She just shook her head and started crying. John's face turned red with anger as he shouted at his mother, "Father beat you again, didn't he?" His mother looked at him, tears in her eyes, and nodded. John's anger boiled over, and he ran to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and rushed to the bedroom where his father was sitting on the bed. Without saying a word, John stabbed his father with the knife, again and again, until his father fell to the ground, bleeding uncontrollably. John's mother rushed to the bedroom, screaming, "John, what have you done?" She saw her husband lying on the ground, bleeding, and her son standing over him, the knife still in his hand with blood stains. John's mother was in shock, and she didn't know what to do. She looked at her son, and then at her husband, and she felt like her world was crashing down around her. She slowly walked over to her husband, knelt down beside him, and took his hand in hers. "Please, don't die," she whispered. "I need you." John stood over his father, who was lying on the floor bleeding uncontrollably. His mother was sitting beside him, begging him not to die. John's face was twisted in anger as he spoke to his father. "Father, remember that last time I promised you that if you ever beat my mother again, I would beat you back?" John said, his voice shaking with rage. "I wasn't threatening you, I was promising you. And now, I've kept that promise." John's mother looked up at him in horror. "John, what have you done?" she shouted. "You've murdered your father." John turned to face his mother, his eyes blazing with anger. "You like the way he beats you, don't you?" he spat. "You like being treated like a slave. Well, I don't care if he dies or not. He deserves it." With that, John turned and stormed out of the room, leaving his mother and father behind. His mother was crying and screaming, trying to get John to come back and help his father. But John was gone, consumed by his own anger and hatred. John's mother noticed that her husband was still breathing, and she quickly shouted for the neighbors to come and help. They rushed in and helped her get her husband to the hospital. Despite the efforts of the doctors and nurses, John's father couldn't survive the injury. He died instantly, surrounded by his wife and the medical team. John's mother wept bitterly in the hospital, overcome with grief and guilt. She couldn't believe that her son had taken matters into his own hands and had killed his father. She thought about all the times her husband had beaten her, and how she had stayed in the marriage for the sake of her son. She thought about how her son had grown up in a household filled with violence and fear, and now, her husband was dead, and her son would have to live with the consequences of his actions. John's mother felt like her world had come crashing down around her. John's mother arrived home that day after her husband's death, and she was sitting down alone in her bedroom, crying and sobbing bitterly. Her sister, Sophia, came over and was consoling her, telling her that it was only the will of God. "It's just the will of God," Sophia said. "We should just let the will of God be. After all, your husband is gone, and the son couldn't take it anymore. He did what he did out of anger." John's mother was still crying and sobbing, and Sophia was trying to comfort her. "Take heart, my sister," Sophia said. "I know he is still your husband, but you have to take it the way it is." John's mother was lamenting, saying, "I never knew my son had such a heart to do such evil." Just then, John walked into the room, pleading and begging his mother to forgive him, but John's mother was unforgiving. "I don't want to see your face again," she shouted at John. "Get out of my sight." John left the room, went to the city room, and sat alone, crying. "Why did I do it?" he kept asking himself. "Why did I take my father's life?" As John sat alone in the sitting room, crying and regretting his actions, he was unaware of the chaos that was unfolding outside. The neighbors had reported the incident to the police, and soon, the sound of sirens filled the air. The police arrived and arrested John, taking him away in handcuffs. His mother was devastated, begging the police to leave her son alone. But it was too late. The law had to take its course. At the police station, John's mother pleaded with the police to release her son, but they refused. John had committed murder, and he had to face the consequences. John was taken to court, where he was found guilty of murdering his father. However, because he was still a minor, he was not sentenced to jail. Instead, he was released and allowed to return home. As John walked back into his house, he was met with silence. His mother was sitting in the living room, staring blankly into space. She didn't even look up as John entered the room. John felt a pang of guilt and regret. He knew that he had caused irreparable harm to his family, and he didn't know how to make things right. He sat down next to his mother, but she didn't say a word. The silence between them was deafening. John broke down in tears, sobbing uncontrollably as he apologized to his mother. "Mom, I'm so sorry for what happened," he cried. "I told Daddy never to beat you again, but he didn't listen. That day, I was very angry. I was very angry. I had to. I never knew that my anger could take me to that extent. John's mother was also crying, tears streaming down her face as she listened to her son's apology. "But you shouldn't have even reacted at all," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "No matter what, your father is still my husband, and I love him. The way we were living, I told you never to bother, but you never listened to me. You should have at least given him a warning." "Not taken his life," John shook his head, still crying. "I know, Mother," he said. "I never thought of killing him. I just wanted to give him a warning, but I didn't know when my anger pushed me to that point." Both John and his mother broke down in tears, unable to control their emotions as they mourned the loss of their father. They cried for a long time, holding each other and trying to come to terms with what had happened. John's mother started blaming herself, telling him that it was all her fault. "Had it been I listened to my sister Sophia, none of this would have happened," she said. "Had I left your father when you told me to, none of this would have happened. But I stayed for love, living with a man who called himself my husband, but treated me like an animal." John wiped away his mother's tears, trying to comfort her. "This is just a lesson to me, Mother," he said. "Even if I get married today or tomorrow, I will never treat my wife or any woman like that. Women are supposed to be respected, not treated like animals." John's mother looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "Please, son," she said. "If you marry today or tomorrow, never behave like your father. It's very bad, very unkind." John hugged his mother tightly. "I promise, Mother," he said. "I will take care of you, and I will make sure you're happy. You'll be my first wife, my first priority." John's mother smiled weakly, trying to reassure him. "There's no way you can replace your father's position in the house, John," she said. "There are so many things he did that you can't do." John promised his mother that everything would be fine. John's mother sat on the bed alone, shedding tears as she thought about the past and the future. "I will teach my son how to treat women," she said to herself. "When he gets married or is in a relationship, no woman will experience what I went through." She thought about all the times her husband had beaten her, and how it had affected their son. "I will also tell him that even if he has issues with his wife, he shouldn't do it in front of their children," she said. Women and parents should respect their children because one day, the devil might use them. John's mother knew that she had to advise her son as soon as possible. "Tomorrow morning, I will sit him down and give him this advice," she said. "Now that I am still alive, I want to make sure he doesn't make the same mistakes his father did." She looked up, as if praying. "I might not be here tomorrow, so the earlier I advise him, the better for him." John also sat in his room, shedding tears and praying to God. "Oh God, please do not give me that man or that spirit, that evil spirit to live this type of life that my father just lived," he prayed. "Please do not allow my wife to experience this. Do not give me the courage to have issues or to fight in front of my children." John thought about how his father's behavior had affected him and his mother. "It's what my father did that pushed me into doing this," he said to himself. "Even if I have a problem with my wife, we will settle it without our children knowing that we are having a problem." John made a vow to himself. "I will never raise my hand to any woman, be it my wife or my girlfriend," he said. "Nothing will ever make me beat a woman in my entire life." Women are special. John laid in bed, feeling a sense of resolve and determination. He knew that he had a long way to go, but he was ready to start his journey. The next morning, John's mother came to him, ready to give him the advice she had been thinking about all night. But John just smiled at her, knowing that he had already advised himself. "Good morning, Mother," John said, hugging her tightly. "I know what you want to tell me." but I've already learned my lesson. I promise to always treat women with respect and kindness. John's mother looked at him, surprised and proud. You're a wise child, John, she said. I know you'll make a good husband and father one day. And with that, John and his mother continued living together, forever changed by the events of the past few days. John grew up to be a good man, treating his wife and children with love and respect. He never forgot the lessons he learned from his father's mistakes, and he made sure to pass those lessons on to his own children.